Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for coming to our talk. We'll get started now. Just before you get introductions, my name is Neil, that's John. We'll do introductions in a moment, but we're here from Fidelity Investments. And Fidelity is as much a tech company as much as a finance company. And for anyone who's worked in regulated industries like finance, you'll know that we don't tend to work out in the open. So we've had an interesting open source journey over the last couple of years. And we want to talk particularly about McGonigle, which was a key ingredient, and that was around recognition. Do you want to just close this? So, standard disclaimer, I'm not selling that and endorsing that, it's just mine and John's story. Yeah, I can put that one in there. So some introduction. So my name is Neil McGonigle and I'm the Director of Cloud Platform Engineering at Fidelity based in Dublin. And the last couple of years I've been working with the Open Source Program Office in Fidelity to refine our internal process around how we contribute to open source and make it as frictionless as possible. And I've also been focused on engagement, driving engagement across the firm and driving people towards the open source initiative and make sure that it was sustainable and vibrant. Externally, I formally sat on the Technical Oversight Committee in the Continuous Delivery Foundation. And I'm a current FINOS ambassador where I work to promote open source adoption across fintech.
Hi folks, nice to meet you. My name is John Kelly. I'm a principal cloud engineer and I work in the Fidelity Architecture and Engineering Group. I specialise in cloud technologies and the enablement of DevOps tooling at the enterprise level. On the open source side, I've been a contributor to an advocate of open source for the last 18 months, and I regularly host open source jams in my home site, which is Galway on the west coast of Ireland.
So let's jump straight in. So what you'll learn today is we're going to have 4 takeaways from this. And the first will be just around the talk about why open source is important strategically to Fidelity and why it's important to our engineers. And we'll also talk about why recognition is a key component of that. We'll talk about how we built a contributor-first model, so how we leverage things like community events, recognition, and also various tools and processes to support that initiative. And we'll talk about the outcomes we saw, because recognition in itself was not about good intentions. It was really about measurable impact. And we'll have a look at what some of those data points were as well, and how they relate back to recognition. And we'll also give you some things that you can reuse in your own company, regardless of the size or structure. So we'll start off with the why. Again, as I said, why this is important strategically, why it's important for engineers, and why recognition is a key component of having a successful open source initiative. So I really like this image. It's not a real Formula 1 car, but you get the picture. It is tight collaboration, rapid innovation, and people working together in a global team to get across the finish line faster, which I think is a kind of symbolic around what open source is as well. If we look at some of the bullets there, if we're developing anything from zero, we're starting at the very bottom. If we can build on strong community foundations and leverage things that are proven and out there, it makes a lot of sense for any company. The same with innovation and collaboration. Open source is a melting pot of innovation. And it's where a lot of our best practices are born and certainly evolve. So again, it makes sense for the company to work within that space. It reduces cost and vendor lock-in. There was a time we used to all pay a lot of money for vendor tooling, proprietary tools, and then if you wanted to make any changes or updates, you had to have a feature request. It was all very costly, both from a time perspective as well as a financial perspective. Working within open source as well benefits our engineers. They get to work in a larger community. They get to be exposed to evolving technologies across a wider code base than we have internally. They get to bring those learnings back in. That obviously benefits them, but also benefits the company. And around attracting and retaining top talent, if we work within the open source space and the community, we're seen as quite a progressive company, especially within finance as well, to be open to that and be a net contributor into the ecosystem. Engineers want to work in that kind of company where that offers them that space to learn and grow and network. So again, it's been helpful to attract talent as much as it's been helpful for our own engineers as well. So it's not hard to initially stand up an open source community inside. What's hard is to keep people coming back week on week, month on month. And there's a few different reasons. One of the main ones there is competing priorities. People have backlog work, incident response. They've got other challenges going on that divert them away from maybe open source. And especially if it's not baked into their own product or platform, they'll normally just focus on what they're doing. Long-term engagement is hard to maintain as well. We've had people come to our workshops. We've had them learn about open source, how to contribute from within Fidelity, and they need to do a contribution and then just not come back. They'll vanish. That happens a lot. And engineers need meaningful incentives. So what that means is they need the opportunity to network and to learn and to grow and to contribute, but they also need things like career visibility. And if any of those components are missing, initiatives become nice to haves, and nice to haves can essentially get dropped. So there are some systemic challenges in any large organization when we think about a successful open source engagement. Bureaucracy and guardrails definitely exist for good reason, but they can become blockers. Security and review process creates friction. If you think about legal review, architectural review, code review, security review, OSPO review, there's a lot of reviews, and it can add friction. That can discourage engineers getting involved. It just takes a really long time to contribute. Lack of alignment with career paths. A lot of managers are focused on delivery metrics and maybe don't talk about things like open source engagement as part of the performance reviews. It can be often seen as extra work, not core delivery, something that's a passion project or a side project. It's only now becoming normalized where it's seen as a mainstream action as we build out our products and platforms. And here's the thing, the culture shift happens when we start to recognize and talk about open source as a key growth opportunity for the company as well as the engineer. That's when it starts to shift and that's when it becomes legitimized. So how do we legitimize any initiative, not just open source? Recognition is one of the key levers we have to do that. So developers are not just motivated by salary, even though I am a hiring manager and it definitely comes into the conversation, but it's not the only motivation for engineers. They're motivated by being masters of their craft. They want to be seen as experts, they want to have influence, and they want to know their work matters. And recognition is the key lever we have to satisfy that need for engineers. Recognition, it's not just swag, it's not just pizzas and stickers and stuff like that. It's performance reviews, it's opportunities to attend conferences, it's career visibility and career progression. They're key metrics. And the last point there, recognition drives retention and fuels innovation. What I mean there is, ultimately, if we keep people in the company longer, if they stay longer, they basically contribute more, they go deeper, and they do that if they feel supported and recognized. That's why they stay. And ultimately, it creates momentum and it fuels innovation for the company as well. So recognition is not just a nice to have, it's strategic in and of itself. So that was kind of the why. I'll talk a little bit about the how now, how we went about building any of this contributor first model. The first thing we did was we established advocacy programs, which was basically identifying champions in different product areas, in different platform areas, and in different regions, so that we had support to grow and teach and promote open source in those communities. We also started to align open source with performance reviews and talking about, career alignment, what opportunities come from open source for the engineer and for the company. We set up a lot of community events, workshops, open source jams, teamed events, lots of different entry points into open source to give people, a way to get involved regularly. Every month there was some sort of event on. Gamification, we had badges awarded for open source contributions, and John will talk more in detail about that later. We had leaderboards. Again, it created visibility, very transparent, and created engagement actually. People liked the idea of getting a badge for contribution and, having leaderboards, having their name up there. Dashboards and metrics were key for us. We built a dashboard where you could track any contribution from the internal approval process at any step, right the way through to where it was merged publicly. That was important for transparency, but it also allowed us to see which projects were being contributed to. Were they strategic? Were they non-strategic? Were our number of contributions trending up or down? Were our number of contributors trending up or down? And that information was really important for us and basically fed into continuous feedback loops. Understanding what the challenges were as people wanted to contribute from within Fidelity. We needed to understand that so we could course correct. If people were having a bad time, we wanted to know, well, why does it suck? What put you off contributing to open source? Where was the
friction points and the pain points. So very important to have the continuous feedback as well. So just a little bit more about the internal advocacy programs. I talked about identifying champions regionally and in certain products and platforms, because those people are best placed to understand what are the open source opportunities within those particular products and platforms, because they understand those products and platforms. So it makes sense to have those people there. They also have big influence with the local communities regionally. People know them, so if they're promoting open source, it really helps. They're also role models. When they get involved in open source and contribute, and people see that it's a positive success, it normalizes that as a behavior, and people are much more likely to get involved. And essentially, we couldn't scale across regions without having these local champions. And we wanted to recognize those champions and make sure that senior leadership, executive leadership, knew who they were, knew what they were trying to do. These people, these champions, were essentially seeding the culture and the community we were trying to create. We also wanted to align open source work with business value. And an example of that is if someone contributed to an open source project which was leveraged or important to one of our products or platforms, we recognize that as a key business deliverable. So it's not just internal products being delivered. We started to recognize the open source contributions that helped us as being key deliverables. We also talked about them in performance reviews, etc. We talked about then certain stories at the executive and senior level that gave examples of where did open source benefit the company, so that they could start to create the connection around, okay, I see now how open source is directly benefiting us, whether it's cost, whether it's time, whether it's our engineers are learning more. Senior people who make a lot of decisions have to understand that success as well. And supporting promotions of growth. A very quick example, I had a girl in my chapter, and she contributed a component to an open source project that actually helped us deliver an internal product much quicker than we expected. That work wasn't on the backlog, it wasn't on her squad backlog, but she saw the opportunity, made the contribution, and that was used as an example of her initiative and talent when it came to year-end promotions, and it was a key decision maker. So again, starting to embed the importance of open source into career development for engineers as well was key. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to John to talk a bit more in detail about the community element and some of the other aspects of what we did. Thanks, John.
So just to expand on a couple of the points that Neil's already made, community building events are a really good way to boost engagement and to recruit new people into the open source initiative in Fidelity. We regularly host open source jams. These are informal, collaborative sessions where people can come together to learn about open source. We find that these jams work best when they are in person, and we conduct them across multiple sites in Fidelity at the same time. Food is a really good way to bring people together, so we try to schedule these jams to coincide with lunchtime, and we'll provide food and refreshments to make them a little bit more enticing. We use these jams to educate people about open source and the value it brings to Fidelity. We onboard them to the open source contribution process to make sure that they have the right tools and permissions in place. And then we'll actually work together on making some contributions to an open source project. Fidelity is a relationships company, and these jams are really good for cross-team collaboration and building those relationships. And there's a lot of visibility on these jams from leadership. So even just by attending one of these jams, you stand to gain some recognition, and it's a really good way to build your professional network and brand within the company. So it goes without saying that the easier the process is, the more people will engage. By removing obstacles and reducing friction, you'll boost participation. Manual steps take time, so we use automation for vulnerability scans, dependency checks, reviews. We work in a highly regulated industry, so for us, security is non-negotiable. And we use automation to make sure that we're not missing any of those vital security checks. We also use other automation, such as automated workflows and bots, to help track pull requests, surface next required actions, update dashboards, make sure contributions and awards are allocated to the right people, just to try to move the process on and keep people informed. And I suppose that the key point here is that simplicity breeds participation. What the goal is to try and free up people to contribute on high value work and not bureaucracy.
So another really effective way to boost engagement and to provide recognition is through gamification and badging. It's a fun way to tap into people's natural motivation for progress, friendly competition and recognition. We use a tiered badging system in Fidelity, green, bronze, silver and gold. And we want to make it as easy as possible to obtain at least one award. So one contribution gets you a green badge, whereas 30 contributions get you a gold award. And these badges come in the form of a digital NFT. We have automation that will mint NFTs and award them to people. And once awarded, these badges will appear on the internet profile of employees, and that's visible for everybody in the organizations to see. We've also built leaderboards around contributions and badges, and these leaderboards will show you the contributions people have made, the badges they hold, the projects they've contributed to. And again, this taps into people's sense of friendly competition because they can compare themselves against their friends and colleagues, and they can also see what it takes to level up to the next badging level. From time to time, we'll run campaigns around open source, around various topics such as infrastructure as code or security, for example. And in the future, we're going to look at creating limited edition badges for these campaigns. And the exclusive nature of these badges will kind of make them more desirable to obtain. So to understand the health and impact of our efforts, it's important to measure the right things. By tracking key metrics, we gain insights into what's working well and what areas need improvement. So some of the metrics we measure are monthly active contributors. This is basically a gauge on current work in progress and who's contributing and what projects are being contributed to. We measure net new contributors. These are brand new contributors that have never contributed before. So this is a very important metric to make sure to measure to make sure that our outreach and recruitment efforts are effective. Merged PRs are contributions that have made it all the way through the contribution process and have been accepted by the maintainers of the open source project. So again, that's another very important metric to keep an eye on. Drop rate. These are contributions that for some reason don't get merged, and that this can happen for a variety of reasons. But it's a very important metric to keep an eye on because a high drop rate can indicate that there might be an issue with your process that needs to be addressed. We also look at the strategic relevance of contributions. We want to make sure that the bulk of our contributions are going towards high-value strategic projects and not take a scattergun approach. And outside of just pure code contributions, we look at event participation in jams and get a gauge of attendees, recurring attendees and new attendees. And again, this gives us insight into how effective our community building efforts are. So it's no good to capturing metrics and data and gathering data without having a way to visualize this and make it meaningful. And this is where portals and dashboards come into play. Visibility is absolutely key, and these dashboards need to be available for everybody in the process to access and view. And with visibility comes accountability. So by making status information visible and showing who owns what, it drives ownership and responsibility. Contributors can see the contributions they've made in the past. They can also see the work in progress and what's the next step. And the ability to see their back work can come in handy when it comes to end of quarter or end of the year performance reviews with their manager. And of course, leadership need this information for situational awareness. They need to get a gauge on a roll-up of activity, what projects are being touched, who's making the contributions. And again, the ability to access this data and to slice and dice it leads to better data-driven decisions. So aside from the more obvious forms of recognition that we've talked about, there are additional incentives that can be offered to make to reward contributions. So one of the key benefits of working in open source is the ability to publicize your contributions on your personal GitHub profile. So for developers, your GitHub profile is like a living portfolio. It showcases the work you've done, the personal projects you've worked on, where your interest lies, and also the open source projects that you've contributed to. It's a validation of your skills and experience, and it gives you professional visibility. Because open source now has become so important to Fidelity, it's now a regular line item and topic of discussion on all hands meetings. And during these meetings, call-outs will often be given to contributors who have made notable contributions. And this really shines a positive light on those people, and from that they gain a lot of recognition and kudos in the org. So you may have a successful open source initiative, and you might have a thriving and engaged community of contributors. But to keep it that way, it's really important to keep your finger on the pulse of the contributor experience. To avoid complacency, it's beneficial to establish continuous feedback loops so that we're always listening, learning, adopting, and improving. We regularly survey regularly survey contributors. We find out what's going well, what's not going well, where their pain points are they getting what they want out of the process? And it's really important to stay connected. We then take that data and we make improvements, adjustments, iterations, and eliminate the pain points. And we just try to keep the process as impactful as possible. At the end of the day, you have to take the good with the bad. So while it's important to always celebrate successes and the good news stories, it's equally important to listen to the gaps and issues and address those issues where you can. So we've looked at the why and the how. Let's take a look now at the results, what's changed, what we've accomplished, and how we've moved the needle for open source in Fidelity. So these are just some of the highlights I'm going to share with you today. Please bear in mind that this is based on data that we've only really started measuring in the last 18 to 24 months. The first three highlights just kind of show how important open source has become and how it's grown. When we started, it was only a small group of early adopters that were engaged in open source activity. Those people were based in a couple of sites, and they represented two divisions, or business units as we call it in Fidelity. Today we've grown our community to over 100 people. They're from 14 different sites across the organization, and they represent 10 different business units. So huge growth, and it's a testament to how far we've come in a relatively short period of time. In addition, we've also taken the data that we've captured from our tracking efforts and those feedback loops I was talking about, and we've used that data to improve our process, and in doing so we've brought about a 25% reduction in our drop rate. And in terms of the open source projects that we've touched, initially we concentrated our efforts on just a couple of strategic high value open source projects. But since then we've made contributions to over 90 projects. So very positive results all told. So aside from some of the highlights I've shared with you, we've also noticed a really positive culture shift around open source. Open source has transitioned from being a niche, specialized activity to a normalized mainstream practice. What was once limited to a small group of early adopters is now widely encouraged and accepted across the org. We're seeing contributions coming from all the pay grades, from interns all the way up to VPs, from techies to non-techies alike. We've also noticed greater leadership engagement. More and more people are getting on board with open source. They're recognizing the value, they're providing support and sponsorship, they're allocating resources, and they're also giving recognition to contributors. And then, of course, there's the FOMO effect. When people see the value and benefits from being involved with open source, they want to be part of it as well. So we've been doing this for a while at this stage in Fidelity, and we've learned a few lessons along the way. I suppose the first one is that recognition must be meaningful. As human beings, we're all different. We all value different forms of recognition. Some people value praise, other people value career growth, others more material rewards. So a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't necessarily work. And it's better to have a multifaceted recognition strategy where you can recognize people in a way that resonates with them. Leadership involvement is also critical. Their support can drive adoption and change. They're also in a position to allocate resources, time, money, and people, and all of that is critical for driving an initiative forward. It's also really important to balance structure with freedom. It's good to have a process with clear guidelines and guardrails, but it's also good to leave a little bit of room for flexibility and creativity. Too little structure can lead to chaos, whereas too much can have a stifling effect. So it's important to strike the right balance. And we talked as well about the use of automation to remove the manual and tedious tasks and just free up people to focus on more meaningful work. And I suppose the last point here is that don't ignore the power of gamification. It's a subtle but powerful tool. It weaves game-like elements like badging, scoreboards, accomplishments and levels into everyday tasks and work. It makes the process of contributing more fun. So I suppose I'm going to leave you with some actionable takeaways. I suppose the first one is to start small, get some leadership, sponsorship on board, identify your initial champions and advocates of open source, start by hosting a few community building events to spread the word, and just slowly but surely build momentum. It's also important to focus your initial efforts on a couple of high-value strategic projects and ensure that all of your initial contributions go to those projects. We talked as well about having a multifaceted recognition strategy, but recognition also needs to be visible. People need to see the benefits. They need to be valuable and obvious. And it needs to be something in it for the contributor and not just for the company. And finally, it's really important to keep on measuring and keep on tracking your efforts, gathering data, eliciting feedback, and then using that data to refine your process and iteration. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time today and hope you enjoy your rest of the conference.
Any questions? Yep.
So this seems to be you focusing a lot on from getting your contributors internally working on external projects. Do you have any of your own open source projects, and are you trying to look at how you can apply it the other way?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think that comes with maturity. When you have engineers who understand open source, they're better placed to then see what they may have developed themselves that would be a good candidate for open source. And we have a couple of projects in the pipeline now that are going through various reviews. I guess to make sure that there's nothing proprietary in the code, so to make it more general, and also to make it less like there's one in particular that was around. Kafka control plane configuration, a tool, so quite specific, but we wanted to make it more generic so that it could apply to anyone else who's using Kafka. So we're in the process of taking out anything that's specific to us and going through the legal steps and then looking to open source that. We do also have 7 or 8 projects out there. You can find them on GitHub/Fidelity, but we're getting into more I would say weightier contributions now. But I think that follows naturally on from building an internal community where you have a lot of engineers who understand the process and the benefits of open source. And that normally comes first. Well, it has for us because we built up then a muscle or capability about open source. But definitely it's where we want to go. We want to be seen as a net contributor to the ecosystem, not just someone who uses open source, but someone who is actually actively involved in influencing the direction of the community, providing projects, providing inputs. We've also had a lot of feature level type contributions to certain projects as well, more than just the initial bug fixes or small changes that we started with when people were learning the contribution process. So it's definitely a journey, but something we're focused on.
Got a couple of trying to make them quick ones. So you ingesting data from like GitHub API or somewhere to build your leaderboards and
Exactly. Mostly around, as I talked about our process a bit, most companies will do it the same, that they probably have an internal mirror of external repos where they'll go and make the change and do all the approval checks in there. But yeah, essentially before you push it out publicly. I mean, anyone in a regulated industry will do it that way anyway. And the key step is how do you make that as frictionless as possible between the required steps before it's ready for a public merge. And that's essentially what we've been evolving over the last couple of years with OSBO, with cybersecurity internally, to get it as tight as we can and still do it. Yeah.
And are you feeding back? You said you're measuring like the drop rate. Are you got quite good connections with the projects that you're contributing to sort of feedback? Well, we were trying to contribute, but we failed because of X, Y.
And they give us feedback too, which if we take an issue and it's open too long, for example. So, but it's a great thing to bring up though, because every open source project has a different personality, and it's important to establish relationships with the maintainers. Some of them will expect quick turnaround, some of them it'll take longer to build trust with. And I think any company our size who's getting involved in projects like this, there's initial kind of, you're a big company, you think you've some weight in here. And the only way to build influence is actually get to know the maintainers, get to contribute something and show you're in it to actually benefit the community as much as to leverage. So again, that's a great point, because we've been involved with, John said 90 plus, it's probably more than that at this point, and each one has a different flavour and personality around what the expectation is for people who want to come and contribute. So establishing those relationships is key.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to see. We're from the GitLab Contribute Success team, so we're doing like the opposite, and we spend a lot of time reaching out. So if you're doing the opposite, that'd be awesome for me.
Yeah.
Proactive.
Yeah.
The last thing was you saying about the jams and that. Is that something that's like an internal thing or externally for members of the public?
You want to answer that one?
That's purely internal. That's something that we do internally. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this something you've considered, like making an external if it's just a generic open source, sort of in people in the local community, etc., to get involved in?
I'm not sure if
hackathon or whatever it might be? Or?
Yeah, I haven't considered that at this point. I think we're still in a stage where we're figuring it all out and getting it to a really refined process ourselves. But I certainly wouldn't rule anything out. I think there's definitely benefits in being more open about how you encourage people about your company's reputation, that you want to be open, you want to work transparently. As I said, that kind of nearly falls into attracting talent as well, if we put ourselves out there. So probably not quite there yet, still working on it. But definitely, we've been looking to grow the attendance to our internal jams from different product and platform areas, different regions, and we're kind of getting to a really good place of maturity now, where we have people in each region that can host a jam, and we can scale that way. And the more people we get involved, the more opportunities we expose then to bring open source into our products and platforms. So, it's a journey, but definitely wouldn't rule out anything when it comes to where we would go next. Very open for it.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
He's a plant. We gave him those questions. They were great questions. Appreciate it.
We'll connect. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
So you mentioned gamification as a powerful tool in this. Any idea why it is so powerful? Because I always associate gamification and badges as like something that teenagers or something.
Yeah.
I suppose it's just
Are you interested in?
I suppose it's human psychology. It just taps into people's sense of fun and wanting to achieve the next level and get the next accomplishment, and kind of games do that in a pretty unique way. So it's a psychology thing, really.
That was exactly my comment when someone suggested we'll do badging. I thought, come on, who cares about a badge? And I was looking for my badge then. And when I got the bronze badge, I was surprisingly proud about it. So I think there's a human psychology element of, if it's available, you kind of want it. So it definitely motivates people, but that's a great question as well, because I felt the same, come on, badges really? And it actually, people were asking about them, when will I get my badge? I did my contribution. It's like, give it a week, we'll have it up there.
You'd be surprised at how many people just want badge.
Yeah.
They do the contribution, and the first question they ask is, okay, where's my badge?
It's on our internal intranet. When you look someone up, you can see badges that they have, and the open source one is a nice one to have, and they're pretty cool as well. So.
I'll give it a try.
Yeah. Cool.
And the NFTs, so you've got some sort of internal blockchain running.
Yeah. We have a team that's helping with that to mint them. And actually it turned out to be an even better idea than we thought, because we could say we can mint a certain amount for this year, and then next year we can have a whole new set of badges that are for the new year. So even if you got your first contributor in 2024, maybe you want a different badge for 2025. Exactly. So we kind of got us thinking then, but there's a separate team that does that first, but it's open possibilities as well when you think about gamification and yearly having different badges as well, which is cool.
Cheers.
All right, cool, great questions, yeah. Thanks for coming, guys, really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.